Hello, aspiring developers. Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to today's session. Today we are going to learn about loops in JavaScript. Loops is a fundamental concept in programming. Learning them will help you understand JavaScript better. So loops in programming, they just allow us to repeat a set of instructions multiple times. This is making our code more efficient. As we said earlier, you may want to execute a specific line of code several times. So if you do it in every line of code, it will be time consuming and the code will be a bit inefficient. But with loops, it will allow us to execute those several lines of codes repeatedly in a very short time. So now let's go straight to Visual Studio Code and see how loop works practically. Okay, with our Visual Studio Code open, we have this README file. It contains some notes that you can use for your revision. If you want access to that README, you just need to tap in the description below the video. You will find a GitHub repository that contains all the notes from the start of the introduction to web development in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So when you tap on JavaScript and you tap on day 4, you're going to find this repository on loops. So let's go ahead and define the syntax of the for loop in JavaScript. So using for loop in JavaScript, all you need to know is the syntax of the for loop. Once you know the syntax, you can easily continue from that point. You see, even in our thumbnail, we say that the syntax of JavaScript, you just have to write for, then you pass 3 parameters inside this parenthesis. The first parameter being initialization, the second one being the condition that you want to test. The condition. Okay, Visual Studio Code is trying to force me to do that. And the last, or rather the third parameter being update. Exactly, so that's okay. So for update, you don't need to use a semicolon. So for initialization, you have to use a semicolon. For condition, you have to use a semicolon, but updates, you don't use a semicolon. So if this condition is going to be true, if this condition is true, you're going to execute the block of code within these curly brackets. So now that we know the syntax for writing a for loop, let us put it into practice. I'll just comment out the syntax so that we can write some definite example. So here you see that for for you first write the initial expression, and we explain this as this expression is executed only once at the beginning of the loop. Remember we said a loop just iterates over a line of code severally, but now the initial expression is only checked once when the loop starts. Then we have the condition. This is the condition for running the loop. So the condition must be true. Okay, sorry about this. The condition must be true for the loop to run. For the loop to run, if it is false, the loop will end. Okay. Yeah, then you also see that the update expression is executed after every loop iteration. So once this block of code has already been executed, it will now it will now perform the update expression. So let us just open our script.js file and we test these loops. Script.js, yeah, here it is. Exactly. So now we're going to test the loop. let's say you want a loop that counts the number of times somebody is skipping a rope. So you can say let skip a rope equals 10. So we can now say for. So we said the first step is initialization. You know perfectly well that in JavaScript we initialize a variable using the let, the var, or the const. So in loops we're going to use the let keyword, and we'll say let initial equals 0. So you already have the initial. So what are we testing against? We are testing initial against skip. Okay, here we can say skip. We want to this is the final value of skipping a rope, so you can call it skip count. So you can say if initial is less than or equal to skip count, so that is the condition that we are passing. What should we do? We should increment initials. So before we even add the blocks of code, let us first understand this line 11 of code. I believe it's visible enough. I can just zoom in a bit. Let me zoom out once, make it more sensible. So you see that let initial equals 0. So first we initialize a variable called initial, and we pass the value 0 to it. And then now we test for the condition. Our condition here is initial should be less than or equal to, you remember the comparison operators, less than or equal to skip count. And in our case here, skip count is 10. Then if that is true, it will execute the block of code. Yeah, it will execute. Where is the error? Okay. You must have this below because that is also commented out. Yeah. If this is true, if this condition is true, it will execute this block of code. And then it will increment the value of the initial. So that's how it's done. So now let's see what we want to log to our console for demonstration. So we can say console.log. Here we want to log to the console the value of skip count. You can say we want console.log skip count. And we can just add some descriptive terms there to help us understand better. So we can say we are counting the skip. So we can say skip count. And then we pass the value of skip count. So yeah, you see here that this skip count will be output to our console. It will be logged to our console every time this condition is met. But now let's say you want to test it. Yeah, so let's see what we log to the console. We're going to log to the console. Let's give it a definitive term and say skip count. Skip count. And then we pass the variable here, the variable initial. Remember, we are using this plus symbol to concatenate a string. Yeah, to concatenate a string. So we'll take this string and add the value of the initial. So here, whatever our initial value is, that is what we are going to add here. So now let's just go through what this line is going to do by launching our terminal. So we see that our terminal is already fired up right there. So now you see that skip count has been initialized to 10. And here we are saying that let initial equals 0. Then the condition that we are testing is whether initial is less than the skip count. If it is less than the skip count, you run this line of code and then you increment the value of initial. So now let's run this script. Just tap on node script.js. If this command does not work for you, it means you do not have node installed in your machine. Just look for the video 31 or introduction to JavaScript video. You'll find instructions on how to install Node.js, or simply go to Node. Just search for Node.js in your browser. Then you download Node.js from the official website, and this code will be now able to work on your machine. So I'll just tap on enter. Now you see that we have skip count value as 0, and it iterates, it prints all these lines of code until it reaches 10, and then it stops printing. So now let's explain this line of code. Here we see that our initial value is 0. So let's just try and understand it here. I hope this green will be visible. So we see understanding the code, understanding the loop. Yeah. So first we start with initial being equal to 0. Then that is what we initialize. We said the first parameter in a for loop is initializing. So we have initialized the variable initial to 0. Then the second parameter in a for loop is the condition. So we test if condition is equal to or less than skip count. So here the next condition we test if initially I have said it's 0. So we test if 0 is less than or equal to, our skip count here is 10. So if that is true, we will log this value to the console, and that's why we print skip count plus initial, and initial in our case here is 0. So that is the first value that we see on the console. Then after that, we increment the value of initial. We update that expression. So now our new initial will be equal to 1. And we said it will repeat this line of code until this condition is not met. But this one is only done once. So the new initial is equals to 1. But I believe if we use this approach, it's going to be a very long video. Let's just use skip count as 3. Let's run this again. We run the script again. Yeah, so now you see skip count is 0, 1, 2, and 3. So first here, just as we started explaining, initial is initialized to 0. That variable is initialized to 0. Then it tests if 0 is less than or equal to 3. If it is true, it logs this value to the console. Let's just say logs to console. I hope it's visible even in gray. Yeah, you see here it logs to the console. Then now it increments the value of initial. I know you remember about the increment operator, the plus symbol, which means you just add 1 to the value of that variable. So our value of the variable was 0, and now it will be 0 plus 1. And after that, it will once again test if our new initial, which is 1, and it will test it against the condition less than or equal to 3. If that condition is true, it logs to console, and that's why we see skip count 1. And again it comes and tests then it updates the expression initial plus plus. So we have our new initial as 1 plus 1 giving us 2, and the loop will still go and check if the condition is met. Remember, it will continue iterating until the condition is not met. So once again it will test if 2 is less than or equal to 3, and you already know that it will log that to the console, logs to console, that is skip count equals to 2. Then once again it will go and test if it will update the expression initial. So from here it was 2. Then now it will update this initial by incrementing it by 1, and so our new initial value is 3. Then it tests if 3 is less than or equal to 3. This is true, so it logs this value to the console, and the value being logged to the console in our case here is skip count. Skip count is 3. Then it now performs the update statement, the update expression here, which is initial plus plus. So now our new initial value is 3 plus 1, in which our case it becomes 4. Then now it tests, just again comes and tests whether the condition is met. So it tests if our 4 is less than or equal to 3, and you find out that this one is false. So when the condition is false, when the condition is false, it breaks the loop, or it stops the iteration. So that's it for the for loop. That's it for the for loop. And this is what happens every time you run this code. Yeah, so that's it for the for loop. So now we have cleared our terminal. Let us check on the next loop syntax, which is the while loop. So I believe this for loop is now well understood. But a point to note is that for loop is used when you know how many times, how many iterations you need. How many iterations are needed. So that is when for loops are used. So in our case here, we know that skip count is needed 3 times. So we need 3 iterations. Maybe let's say starting from 1, because normally we start counting from 1, such that if we run this, we'll have only 3 iterations. So skip count 1, 2, and 3. So when you know how many times the iterations are needed, that is when you use the for loop. So now that for loop is well explained, let me comment out this for loop code, and we can dive into the while loop code. So now the next one is while loop. As seen from the thumbnail, while loop is quite simpler in syntax than the for loop. You only need to write the condition and the block of code to be executed. Remember, this is curly braces, so block of code to be executed. A code to be executed. So this is the syntax of the while loop. Let me just comment out the syntax. Then now we can have it in a practical example. So let's say you want to count down some number. So you can say, first you will have to initialize that number that you want to count down. An example is you want to count down from maybe 0, not from 0, from 10 to, let's say from 5, because I want a smaller number, so we can explain the whole of it. So we can say let count equals 5. We have initialized that variable. Then you will come and say while. So now the condition that we are passing. So while count is greater than 1, greater than 0, because we want to even output 1. You run some piece of code, or rather you execute your statement, and we still want to log to the console count is, or rather we say count is equal to, yeah. So once you do this, you see that 5 will always be greater than 0. So every time it runs this loop, it will never end. This will be an infinite loop because the value of count declared up here is 5, and this 5 is always greater than 0. So this loop will never end. You have to include something that will make a change to the loop and make it end. So this is an example of a loop that does not end. We call them infinite loops, and they are very bad because they can eat up the resources of your machine. So let us see an infinite loop in action. You see it iterates through count severally. You can see it is not ending. If you can see my cursor point here, it is not ending. It keeps printing more and more. So if you want to stop an infinite loop, just tap on Control C on your machine to forcefully exit that execution of code. Tap on Control and C. So in case you mess up and you start an infinite loop, you don't have to worry, just tap on Control C to end that loop. So now let's make our loop here to make sense. We want to count between starting from 5 all the way down to 0. So we have to add something that will make the loop that will add sense to our loop. That's why I'm using the count minus minus to decrement the value of the loop every time the code is executed. So let us now run this code that is corrected, and we see it in action. Node, and then the script name. In my case, it is script.js. Oh, sorry, forgot to pass in the value itself. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, let's run the script again. Yeah, so now you see here that we are counting down from 5 all the way to 1. Just as we were doing in for loop, while is now even simplified. So let us say understanding while loops. Understanding while loop. While loop. Yeah. And you can use the multi-line comments. We already talked about this. I believe you know them. Yeah, so for while loop, it will come here and first we already have an initialized variable 5. So here we say count is already initialized to 5 to begin with. And then just as in for loop, it will also test if our value of count, which is 5, is greater than 0. And you see that this is true. So if that is true, it will log to the console. So we say logs to the console. Logs to the console the value that you want it to log to the console. In our case, we are logging to the console the string count plus the value of that count variable. So it logs count 5 to the variable. And then it does the same thing here. So let me just, then it decrements the value of count. Sorry, I forgot to add that. So we say count minus minus. This is the decrement operator. We had already talked about it in previous videos. If you don't know about it, you can just watch the operators in JavaScript. So this will decrement the value of count from 5 to 4. So the new value of count is 4. And this will continue. It will continue looping through this until the value is not met. So here, this is the first iteration that we got count is equals to 5. That was output logged in the console. Then the value was decremented. So now again it will come and test while count is greater than 0. So now the new value of count is 4. So while 4 greater than 0, you see that this is true. So it will log that value to the console. Here we see count is equal to 4, and then it will decrement the value of count to 3. So the new value of count here is 3, and it will test if 3 is greater than 0, which is true. It will log that count equals 3 to the console, and then it will decrement the value of count to 2. Then the next thing, now it will test if, so the new value of count is 2. It will test if 2 is greater than 0, and you see that that is true. It will log that value to the console, count equals to 2, and then it will decrement the value of count. So it's 2, it will decrement it to 1. And again, let me just reuse this piece of code. Yeah, it will decrement it to 1. So the new value of count here is 1, and it will test if 1 is greater than 0, and that is true. It will log this value to the console, count is equals to 1, and then it will decrement the value of 1 by the value of count by 0. Then now the final iteration, it will now the new value of count here is 0. It will test if 0 is greater than 0, so that is false, and now it will not continue executing the code, but instead it will break out of the loop. So this is the basic breakdown of how a while loop works. Just have to understand each iteration. I can reduce this also to 3 so that we have everything on one screen. That will also help us reduce this first piece of code there, so that we have everything on one screen. Let's just clear this. Okay, sorry. I'll just clear that. Then we run this again. Node script.js. Yeah, so this is what we are seeing. We are logging 3 to the console, then 2 to the console, then 1 to the console. And then the next one is false, and it breaks off out of the while loop. So in this one screen, you can just like take a screenshot of all this, and it can be helpful for your understanding. You can take a screenshot of this, and you can go through it for you to understand the while loop. And with that, you can go to the do while loop. So the do while loop is similar to while loop, similar but not the same. The syntax for the do while loop, you just say do, then here you say code to be executed, executable code. Okay, that's it. And then while, and there you pass the condition. So this is the syntax for the do while loop. Because we have not defined condition anywhere, this will throw an error if we run it. So that's why I comment out the syntax all the way from up there. So now let's see the do while loop in action. So the do while, what do while does, first it executes some line of code or whatever is inside the block of code to be executed. After it executes that, it now tests for the condition. So an example of the do while, you can say do, and then here we console to the log, we console log first before we even start. And you can say here the value of x equals, and here we can pass the value of x. But first you must, you remember that you must initialize x should be a value, should be initialized, sorry, before it is used. Yeah, so the value of x is x, and that in a semicolon. Then remember you have to create something that will make the loop to break, or that will vary the test condition. So here you'll come and say which expression do we pass. Let's say you want to output, let's also put this just 3 times. So we say x less than 3. Yeah, so what this line of code does, let's just understand it first. Say understanding do while, do while. So as we said, the do while will first perform an action, then sorry, then test the condition. So here you expect to see that the value of x is 1. So the first thing it does, just use this multi-line comments to explain. So the first thing it does, it logs this to the console. So this starts by directly logging to the console. So logs, here the value of x is 0. It is initialized as 0. So it logs the value of x as 0. So we say logs 0 to console. Logs 0 to console. And after it has logged 0 to the console, it now takes the value of x and increments it to 1. After it has already done that, now it comes and checks if the value of x, in our case here is 1, is less than 3. And you see that this condition is true. So it will again start this line of code over and over again. Yeah. So now it will, now that the condition is true, it comes back and starts the iteration again. So the new value of x is 1, so it will log that 1 to the console. I really hope you can see this part of my screen that is a bit dark. Yeah, it logs 1 to the console. And then it increments the value of 1. So our new value of x will be 2. Sorry, it increments the value of x, not 1. So then it comes and tests if 2 is less than 3, and it finds this value to be true. So if the value is true, once again it will continue with the loop. So now it will continue with the loop by outputting 2 to the console. So it logs 2 to the console. That is the value, the new value of x. And then it increments the value of x. So now we have x as 3. The new x is now 3. And then it tests if 3 is less than 3. And you see that this value is false. So once it's false, it immediately breaks off the loop. So this is how the do while loop works. So we expect to see 0, 1, and 2 to our console. So let's just run this script. Let's run this script so we can see that in action. Oh, sorry, we did not comment out this do. Where is it? We don't comment out something. This while loop, yeah. Let's comment it so that we can easily see the flow of the correct flow of what we are logging to the console. Yeah, so we run the script again. And just as we explained here, you see that it first logs 0 to the console, then it logs 1 to the console, then it logs 2 to the console, just as we explained here. So that is how the do while loop works. And now that you understand the for loop, you understand the while loop, and you understand the do while loop. The do while loop. Also, if you need, you can just take a screenshot of this page, and maybe you can look at it and understand it better. Yeah. So now with the understanding of loops in JavaScript, maybe we can learn more about how to include conditional statements in loops, because you might want to loop but also loop with conditions. So let us learn looping with conditions. I'll just open a new script tag. So here I'll open a new script tag and say, how should I call it? Loop.js. Okay, that is fine. We now have a new script tag here, loop.js, and here we want to test loops with conditions. So loops plus, we just say plus conditions. We already learned conditional statements, and now that is the if, the else if, and the the switch case. So now we want to learn how we can implement conditions inside our loops. Very interesting topic. So now we are going to use the if statement. I believe that's the simplest to understand. So by now you already have a grasp of the if statement. We're going to initialize, let us just start a for loop. So let's say for, we can say let, what can we initialize? We can say let score, we can use scores, let score equals 0. We start at 0. Then we can say score should be less than 100. Here we're speaking about percentage. Then the update expression, here we can say score plus, what can we say, score plus 20 as our update statement. So our for loop is ready. I already have. So remember, anytime you initialize, you start a for loop, just remember you must have the 3 parameters. And you see, this is a complete statement, it ends in a semicolon. This is a complete statement, it ends in a semicolon. But this update statement, it is done only when this one is true. If it is false, it breaks off, so it even stops looking at that statement. So now we want to add an if. Let's say if we want to add an if condition there. We say if, can say if score is equal to, okay, we're adding 20, so 20, 40, 60. Can say if it's equal to 60. Then now the message that you want to pass across, here you can log to the console. Can log to the console above, let's say if it is greater, sorry, if it is greater than 60, it should log to the console equal to or greater than 50. I believe 50 is the average. Yeah, because when we're, okay, yeah, I believe 50 is the average. When you're above half, you're above average. Or when you're at exactly half, you should be at average. So if our total score is 100, but somebody can have 100 as the total score. So let's just use less than or equal to as our condition. Yeah, so if score is greater than or equal to 50, it logs to the console average. And now let's choose the break. Let's understand the break keyword. But also outside the if statement, we want to log to the console whatever happens within the for loop. So we can log to the console and say score equals, okay, I just missed this score. I say score equals, and then we can pass here the value of score. The value of score here is score. Yeah, that's it. So now let's understand this before we even run the script. So we say understand. That is what we want to do. We want to understand the code. So what does this code does? Or what does this code do? First, you remember the for loop. Let me just comment that out first so you understand. You remind yourself on the for loop. And just as we said, okay, will I type all this once again? Okay, let me just quickly type it. Okay, for loop. Yeah. So first, it will the value score is initialized to 0, so we know our new score, our score is 0. Then it tests if score, say it tests if score which is 0, sorry, is greater than, oh, this should be greater than. Is it? No, it should be less than, because we're incrementing the score. So it tests if it is less than or equal to 100. Yeah, sorry about the confusion. Less than or equal to 100. And you find that this is true. 0 is less than or equal to 100. So it will output, it will log to the console here, because if you comment this out, you know that when you comment something out, it is not seen in in the console. So it will log the value of score, which is 0, to the console, logs 0 to console. And the next thing after logging that to console, you already know that it will increment the value of score. So the new score will be score which is currently 0, then plus 20. So our new score will be 20. And like we said, what loops do? They just iterate over a code, or they execute a code repeatedly. So I think we should just increment by 40. Okay, just by 20 for you to understand it better. So next, our new score here is 20. It will test if 20 is less than or equal to 100, which is true. It will log that 20 to the console, and then it will increment the value of score. So the new value of score will be 40. So next, our new value of score is 40. It will test if 40 is less than 100. If that is true, it will log that 40 to the console and increment this value to 60. Once again, the new value of score is 60. It will test if 60 is less than or equal to 100. Then it will log this 60 to the console and increment the new value to 80. So the new value of score is 80. It will test if 80 is less than or equal to 100, and that is true. It will output that to the console and then increment this value to 100. So our new score is 100. It will test if score, okay, our new score is 100, sorry. So it will test if 100 is equal to or less than 100, of which that is true. So it will output 100 to the console, and it will increment the new value of score to 120. Then the new value of score is 120. It will test if 120 is less than or equal to 100, and you notice that this is false, and so it will break out of the for loop. And so this is where the for loop ends. So you already understand how the for loop works. You can just run the script to confirm that. Our new script is called loop.js. So we run node, then the file name. Our file name here is loop.js. Oops, sorry. This is an infinite loop. Now that we have stopped this infinite loop, let's again check on the error. So we are initializing score to 0. We are testing if score is less than or equal to 0, and we are updating the, when you update the value of score, it should be score. It should take the current value of score, then add it. It should first take the current value of score, then add it to that new value that you want to output. Sorry. Yeah, this is the update expression that we should be having. You notice that score plus plus in our previous example, this is exactly same as saying score equals to score plus 1. Now in our case, we don't want to increment it by 1. We want to increment it by 20. So score equals to score plus 20 is going to be the same as score plus equals 20. So this value of score equals 20 is the same as saying score equals score plus 20. Just the same way, score, our previous one, which was score plus plus, is the same as saying score. Okay, what's going on? It's the same as saying score equals score plus 1. So this value is the same as this one when you use the increment operator. And if you want to use the plus equal sign, it means you just add the value, take this variable, and add it to this value. So saying score equals score plus 20 is the same as score plus equals 20. So that is where we messed. And you see, if you mess with the loops, you can easily fall into some infinite loops. Yeah, so now that we've already corrected our code, now we expect it to display this 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100. So now let's run this code again. Yeah, so you see that score outputs 0, 20, 40, 60, and 100, just as we explained in this piece of code. So that is understanding the for loop. Now let's bring in this if statement. I believe you already understand if. So now we want to understand how to use if inside a loop. So you see here that it tests once it will be testing across all these conditions. But now we are adding if in between all these conditions, because every time it loops this, it will also test the if condition, then continue to this, then test the if condition, then continue to this score equals 40, then test the if condition. So that is what is going to happen in this new block of code. Now let's see what if does. You see that if is also testing for a condition, and the condition for if is if the score is greater than or equal to 50. So greater than or equal to 50, it will log to the console average, not average, greater than or equal to 50. So that is above average. And then it will break the loop. So here we're trying to understand two things: the if condition and the break loop. And the break keyword. Sorry, break is a keyword. This break keyword, here it is used to terminate the loop. You already have a loop and it's running, but now you introduce a break keyword to terminate that loop. And they're important to control the flow of the flow within the loops. So first we can do it without the break keyword. So you can just understand the if first. Let's clear the terminal and then we run the script again. So now you see that when we run this code, we run the loop till score equals 40, just okay. So it tests this, it finds scores 40 to be, the condition here is not true. So it will just ignore this and continue to do this. You can even put this in an else statement. And then it continues looping until to the point that it finds score equals 40. And when it increments 40, here now you see, it logs this to the console. And now our new value is 60. Should I just like delete this? I want to have everything in one piece of code. Let me just delete that for now. And then I reduce the size of the screen. I believe it's still visible. Yeah, so now at this point, we see that our new value of score is 60. So just as before, it will come into the loop and it will check if 60 is less than or equal to 100. That is true. So now it can execute the block of code inside the curly brackets. But here now we find a new condition. So here we are adding another condition. And the new condition is if score is greater than or equal to 60, of which here 60 is greater than or equal to 60. So this is the next. This is the if condition. This one is the for condition. The for condition, and it was outputting to true. This is the if condition, and it outputs to true. So if this if condition is true, it will log to the console what is in the if condition. So we can just add this and then we say logs average above average to the console. So let's just say logs to console. So once it does that, it exits this if, and it continues with the for loop. Because this line of code has already been executed, now it continues to execute the remaining lines of code. And the remaining line of code is log to the console the value of score. And that is why we see the value of score as 60. And it repeats this same piece of code now. So we have these two additional lines of code in every iteration. So every iteration has these two additional lines of code. Here it will test if 80 is greater, here we are testing if it is greater than 50, not 6. So if 80 is greater than 50, that is true. And then again it will come here and test if our new score, which is 100, is greater than 50. That is the condition that we are passing, and it will continue like that. But if the first condition is false, now the block of code will just break at this point. And if it breaks at that point, it means that if will not be executed. And that's why you see that the last thing we are seeing here is score is equals to 100. If is now not being executed anymore. So that's it for the if. Now let's introduce the break keyword. So what break does, it tests if this condition is met. If it is true, it will break the loop at that point. So let us just see it in action. I know by now you understand when I say it breaks the loop. It stops or it terminates the loop. So before the break, okay, let me just clear. So this was before the break. And now let me return the break so that you can just see both of them. So you see that before the break, it tests the condition of the if, and it continues logging to the console. So this is before the break. But after the break, you see that once this condition is met or this condition is true, it stops the whole loop. So that's where we have the above average. So that's how to use the break keyword. It will terminate the loop altogether. But then we also have another keyword, continue. So during, if you understand loops, we only have two main keywords. That is the break and the continue. So the continue in a loop, all it does, it just skips that point of iteration in a code, and it continues with the execution of the other parts of the code. So here you'll notice that once this condition is met, it will log this to the console, but then it will continue with all these other operations. So let us just run the script again. Yeah, so now you see that once the condition is met, it logs this to the console, but then it skips this value of score, which it should be outputting here, because okay, I want us to first run it without the continue, and then now we run it with the continue, so you can understand it better. So you see that initially, once the if is executed and found to be true, we output above average to the console, and then we continue outputting these other values, continue logging these other values. As the loop continues, you continue logging these values to the console. But when you use a continue, it also it skips that iteration. So the iteration is skipped, but all these other ones will continue. So the iteration is paused at this point. From where you have continue downwards, the iteration is paused. But every time the loop continues, the loop will always continue until this condition is false, or if it finds a break keyword. So two things can terminate a loop. This condition, if it turns out to be false, it will terminate the loop, and a break keyword can also terminate a loop. So that's it for the break and continue keyword. The more you practice, the more you'll understand. This one is going to be provided for you in the repository that I said is linked below. So you can always go through this. It has some detailed explanation with a few blocks of code for you to test your understanding of the statement. The video recording will always be there, so you can easily use the video recording to understand whatever has been taught during the video. You can always rewind it, you can always replay it until you get it right. So that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching to this point. We value your time, and we also thank you for investing your time with us. If you like this content, please hit the thumbs up button to like our content. We appreciate comments, because with comments we will understand how to improve or what to improve. Maybe the speed is too high, maybe the voice is not okay. Just have it down in the comments. Maybe you find it exciting or it has helped you out. You can just write that down in the comment section, and you can share it widely to also those who you feel it will be of help to, and we will really appreciate that support that you give to us. Have a happy coding week.